We are live and welcome. I'm honored for every single person that shares space with us this evening to have my guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Sure. Dr. Ray Ankrum, superintendent of Riverhead Charter Schools located out on Long Island, New York. And why I do what I do. Listen, growing up, I had the privilege of having a lot of black black male and female educators in my life. They poured into me, beginning in what we call Regina Celli in Louisiana, so Head Start, right? My Head Start school was Regina Celli, and I had black educators from early on that was pouring into me, letting me know what the deal was in terms of what the expectations were, right? But prior to that, my grandmother always instilled that like education is going to be the ways and hopes to get where you needed to be. And so she always put that at the forefront in terms of education. But fortunately for me, again, I had folks that looked like me, that inspired me to want to get out and do the right thing, right, and possibly give back in this space.
Absolutely, brother. That lineage runs deep, right? To think about, what you just shared. Um, when I heard you talk about that, I had black male educators in my career, but maybe let's say three or four, kind of
Yeah.
spread out.
Yep.
In my formative years, I had two educators who were black women who really poured into me, saw me. It was the first time I really felt valued and seen in school.
Yep.
But that isn't traditionally the experience that our babies get, is seeing you or I in front of them, teaching, leading, whatever have you. I believe last I checked, it was 1.3%, less than 2%
It's
of
definitely
educators.
less than two, probably like 1.8. But I feel
1.8.
like
Okay.
I feel like that number is going down every year because a couple years back
Yeah.
it was 2%, and so man, it's just yeah.
Yeah. I think about that, and man, the impact of, I heard some other person say that it was like the mighty 2%, the impact of the mighty 2%. Um, Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
In your formative years, as we're talking about Lil Ray growing
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
um, what what was go a little bit more into the context of schooling for you, what that experience was like,
Yeah.
and then what kind of build from there.
Sure. So for me, I feel like so I want to make sure that I lift the people that played an important role in my education, right? And so one of those people, his name RIP, his name was Charles Talley. And so Charles Talley was the bus driver for bus 99, right? And so that's where it all started. Started for me, getting on the bus. And so from getting on the bus, I saw this black man that was driving the bus, right? And like he had his own set of rules and expectations that he had for everybody that was on the bus. And so he was well known in the community. Folks knew what it was, right? And so you wasn't really talking back to Mr. Talley. You wasn't doing any of those things, because if you did, it was going to be a conversation, right? And so just that love, right, that you felt from him getting on the bus, because he had high expectations for you, right? And I say that to say that a lot of times now, man, you'll see folks that are driving these buses and whatnot that have no connection to the community, don't really care, they're just doing it because it's a job. It was more than that for him, right? And because it was, it was one of those professions that I could see folks aspiring to be, right? Like one of my best friends right now is a bus driver, and we talk all the time about the impact that he has on kids in our community in Louisiana, because he's the bus driver, the football coach, and he just wears multiple hats and does multiple things in terms of being in the community and being involved in everybody's life. And so education for me, man, like, you know, I also got to mention my Sunday school teachers, right? Like I had a Sunday school teacher, Miss Callahan. She was the first lady of the church, but she was also a special educator, right? And so there were strategies that I didn't know that was happening in that Sunday school class, right? That now that I had gone to college to become a teacher, I'm like, wait, this is what we were doing? right? So it's like we was doing that with scripture, right? And I'm like, wow. It was amazing. And so as I think back on like my educational journey, man, it's so many pieces um that it's so many pieces to it. And like, I'd be remiss to say that I had white teachers that inspired me as well, right? And I just think that good teaching can happen in you just gotta love these kids, man. You gotta love them, right? And so if you love kids, regardless of what gender you are, regardless of however you identify, regardless of whatever race you are, if you love kids, that's gonna resonate, and you're gonna be able to do the job of making that connection.
The foundation has to be love, right? Like if we're not doing that, then we're missing everything else along the way. Like I was having a conversation just today with the staff that I serve down here in South Jersey. Um, and I'm assistant principal at a middle school. And middle school is a special breed, man. Like,
Ooh.
yeah, yeah. Middle school is 5-year-olds and big bodies sometimes. There's a lot going on in middle school, right?
Yeah.
And um talking to the staff, and we're talking about how like this is the time of year where teaching gets rough. We're counting down the days till their spring break, and we're kind of a little bit set on edge by certain behaviors that we feel like are repeated or things like that. And in that process, in that frustration, things come out, right? That if we were in our best frame of mind, if we were our best selves, we wouldn't see certain things. So I'm talking about things from write-ups to interactions to, what's happening in the classroom. Are we going above and beyond in terms of how we're structuring our lessons? Did we turn in things that, like all of that goes into it because man, this job is hard. But
Ooh.
if love is the anchor,
Yeah.
then in the midst of all the uncertainty, we'll keep the main thing the main thing.
Yes, sir.
It yeah. I so let me ask you this. Where did you feel like was that a consistent basis for you throughout your schooling experience? Like that foundation of love, you felt that and knew that as you were kind of matriculating through the educational system?
For the most part, yeah. But
Yeah.
we listen. I hate doing this, right? But like we're here, right, and we're having a real organic conversation, right? And so we talk a lot about black teachers, right, and the impact that they have. But it has to be the right black teacher, right? Because like
Mhm.
I experienced a black teacher that
Come
dimmed
on
my
now.
spirit. And so, it hurt me so badly because it was somebody that looked like me, right? And like my expectations were just so high in terms of just like, what my expectations were for that particular teacher, right? Her name was Miss Jones. Miss Jones was my seventh grade American history teacher, right? And so, bro, I'm putting myself on blast.
Okay.
In middle school, you don't really know your hormones and stuff like that, right? And like your body is like you outside running and doing all that stuff and whatnot, right? Like you could be the smelly kid, right? And so
Yeah.
I happened to be the smelly kid at this particular time in my life, right? When you come from low socioeconomic status type background and whatnot, there's certain things that just occur, right? That are beyond you and beyond your control, right? So I grew up pretty rough. And so there was a time where, I was just thinking, but rather than her pulling me to the side in order to say, hey, I'm gonna give you this lesson on hygiene, or for her to say, "Hey, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna make a connection with another black teacher that's in the building, a black male teacher that's in the building, to have that conversation with me," bro. I felt like she kind of publicly shamed me in terms of
Wow.
in terms of and so I say that to say, um, even with her doing that, it kind of motivated me, right? Because like I wanted to be a history teacher, but I wanted to be a better history teacher. I wanted to be the history teacher that made that connection with kids to where if that ever happened, and it did, I taught in Baltimore, right? But I was able to like take my babies, pull them to the side, give them a rag, give them all the things that they needed, give them soap, give them deodorant, give them all the things that they needed that I never had in middle school. because I wanted to be better. I wanted to show up better in that space than what my seventh grade teacher, who was black, uh, showed up for me. That was important for me.
Absolutely. When you talk about the right black teacher, like I think that's so important because if we're gonna have authentic conversations, we're gonna be real about it, right? There there can sometimes be this misnomer that because you present a certain way that you have particular understandings, and that's not true, right? And um I say this, for me, my deepest wounds have come from white supremacy and blackface,
Yes, sir.
where the ideology comes out, but I assumed, maybe I thought maybe that there was a connection, you understood, we were there, we were vibing, and then come to find out there's a different ideology, methodology behind how you perceive me, how you perceive our babies, how you perceive their communities, right? I was on with Dr. Jamila Lescott, and she said something profound. She said, you cannot claim to be anti-racist. You cannot claim to be culturally responsive. You cannot claim to be any of the buzzwords that we like to throw out if you do not see and value and love our babies and their communities. Like,
Yes,
if
sir.
love isn't the
And their
grounding
parents.
force,
Well,
that
so
part,
you said community, but
yes,
definitely their parents.
right, right, because that parent that comes in and may not, present the way we
Yes,
want
sir.
them to. If they come in and they may have looked like they rolled out of bed and got there, they're coming because they've given us the best that they have, and they're
Yes,
trying to
sir.
do everything that they can to value and to serve and to love. And if this doesn't present the way we want it to, we
Mhm.
can't then go back and then say, oh, because you didn't present yourself this way, you
Yeah.
don't value, you don't love, you don't serve, you don't do whatever, right? Like, and I think those judgments happen very, very quickly, particularly in education.
Yeah, you better say it. You better say it. Listen, so my research is on parent engagement in urban charter schools through the lens of black male principles, right? And so one of the things that you see in terms of parent engagement is that it's viewed through the white middle class, right? So like you'll have white
Mm,
women that racialized white women that show up and that are actively engaged, that can be the classroom parent because they have spouses that are out making eight figures, right? That don't allow them or afford them to have to work, right? But like my
yeah.
argument is this. My argument is that um if you have historically marginalized families that are out working three jobs in order to put food on the table to make sure that their kid is able to eat, then I would make the argument that there is more love on that end for me going out and killing myself than it is from you just showing up with you having the privilege of being able to show up, right? And
Hmm.
so I feel like we always gotta like balance these counter narratives and like not just allow for them to just stand as written, right? Or stand as spoken.
Yeah.
School as it is very adversarial in terms of a school versus community kind of thing, right? And especially when you think about charter schools, when you think about charter schools are in many like urban areas, right? So like you come into an urban area, and then m- uh, most of these people that come into these areas don't look like the people that are in the area, don't want to build relationships with the people that are in the area, right? And because of that, it's like, I'm gonna talk down, I'm gonna look down
Mhm.
on you, right? I'm not trying to build community with you, right? I mean, you brought me on here, man. I'm you know
That's it. Like the school is set up like, you know, the old school castle with the moat around it, and we'll let the drawbridge down if only if you present the way we're asking you to
Yes.
present. If only if you show up the way we're asking you to show up. And if you don't, then there are ways, right, that we can um, push you out, ostracize,
100%. Yes, sir.
communicate that you
Yeah.
don't belong. All
Yeah.
of these things go into what it means to it might not be overt, but
Yeah.
we will definitely communicate very easily that you don't belong or that you're not accepted as is.
We could talk about the ways. I'm gonna give you one right
Please,
now.
let's do it.
We talk about weaponizing CPS, Child Protective Services, right?
Ooh,
So
okay.
you call me, right, as a parent, and you're like, "Hey, I'm having issues with your child," right? You don't know what me and my community do in terms of like making sure that you don't have issues with our kids, right? And so, regardless of whatever those standard practices are, right? we're now in a place and space to where I'm doing what you asked me to do, right? So kid comes in, kid is behaving the way that he or she or they should behave, and now all of a sudden it's like you want to pick apart the methods that took place in order for that kid to be in the place and space to learn, right? And so
Mm,
now you bring in CPS. CPS is being weaponized now because I only did what you asked me to do based off of my wherewithal, based off of my abilities, based off of my capabilities, right? And
yeah,
so just because it's not aligned with what you may do doesn't mean that it's not right.
yeah, yeah. And the way that the default mode is, middle class white ways of being, knowing, right?
Yes, sir.
The way that is the default mode presents itself in how we view child rearing, how
Yep.
we view children, how we view it- child advocacy, right?
Yes,
When
sir.
our babies step up to say, no, I don't like that.
Yes,
No,
sir.
that isn't working for me. It is
Oh, that's
no,
disrespect.
I don't. Absolutely. And those are the things, right? It's disrespect, it's
Yeah.
defiant,
Yeah.
it's disruptive. And we
Yeah.
can't quantify that. We can just know it when we feel it. And then when
Yeah.
they send it to you or I, Doc, well, not really you, because you big time, but for me, they send it to
I still
me.
get it. I still get it.
Yeah, they want me to now be the judge, jury, and executioner to
Yeah.
now exact their revenge because the child didn't show up in the way that they wanted them to. It's not a teachable moment, right?
No,
So, like,
not at all.
I say this all the time. Like, I'm a huge proponent of restorative practices, like
Of
done with
course.
fidelity, right?
Yep.
And so when I talk about it, typically people feel like, well, it doesn't work, and I'm always
Oh, it
asking them, like,
absolutely works. You just got to buy into it.
Doc,
Listen,
Doc,
you preaching to the choir right now. Like you can't you're not gonna move forward with that kid unless there's some restoration. You're not gonna move forward with those parents unless there's some restoration as well, right? So like if this kid is feeling away and you're not having that reset conversation, then the same behaviors are going to happen, right? And you know what peeves me, bro, is that
talk to
when
me.
you have educators that are like, well, what's the consequence? What? Like what? Like yo, that is like the go-to statement, right? It's like, what is the consequence? What's the consequence? What's happening to him? Whatever, right? And it's like, man, this is not prison, right? This is not prison. You want to get this kid in a place and space to where they want to learn and be around you in in your class, right? And if
Yeah.
that's what the end goal is, then we need to start doing more to find out what the root cause analysis is, as opposed to finding out what the punishment is. It's it's wild out here.
So those carceral understandings of consequence, of
Mhm.
justice, right? That we can only answer, harm with harm, violence with violence. That kind of thing is what makes it so that when a child comes in and let's say they blew it, right?
Yep.
They come in, they're already dysregulated. You're mad at them because they don't have a pencil, they didn't finish their homework, they put their head down, and the first thing out your mouth is, "Well, nice to see you.
Yeah.
You finally showed up." And now
Yeah.
the kid says something back. Now you are
Yep.
already petty,
Yep.
you are already the dysregulated adult, and you say something to him. Now the kid sounds off and tells you about yourself.
Of course.
Now you want me to exact revenge on your behalf, but you poured the
Yeah.
lighter fluid. You
100%.
lit the match,
Yep.
threw it on there, and now you want me to put out the fire,
Yeah.
right?
I refuse to do
Like,
that. I refuse to do that. I refuse to be that person, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Less than
okay,
72 hours ago, we had a student on the bus, and the student went off. Like I guess another student, because we're in the era of social media, another student recorded the student going off, right? But
yeah,
so the trigger to the student going off was the fact that an adult that was on that bus called them out of their name, right? And
mm,
so I'm like, all right, well, of course, I'm gonna have a redirection type conversation and restorative conversation with you to let you know that you're a kid and you shouldn't be talking to an adult that way. However, I also have to have the understanding of we grow up, we're in an era to where like this self-preservation in terms of like how these kids must feel like they have to defend themselves because maybe they don't have someone that's going to defend them, right? And
right,
so my thing with this particular kid was like, yo, listen, when you go home, you tell your mom or you tell your dad, right? Because a lot of times we leave out that dad part, right? And we shouldn't,
Talk
right?
about it.
Leave out that dad part. We shouldn't. You tell your parents, and then if your parents don't do anything, then you come in tomorrow, you find Dr. Ankrum, you're like, listen, this is what happened on this bus. And you best believe if it comes to me, I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna advocate for you because you came in and you advocated for yourself, right? And
Yeah.
so if an
Yeah.
adult made you feel unsafe or made you feel some kind of way, then it is my job to make sure that I go and I find the answers so that we can now have a conversation to make you whole, to make you feel human. And I feel like a lot of times we have these dehumanizing conversations with kids, right? Because we are unwilling to look at them like they're young adults or they're young emerging parts of what's going to be a civilized society, a member of a civilized society, right? It's like
Yeah.
I don't they don't look at these kids as human beings.
So the one that to your point that gets me, right, is when I'm walking the hallway trying to be present, greeting kids, whatever, or even when I'm working with a school and consulting or whatever have you, I see this prevalent is as leaders will tell me, and I've experienced it myself, where a teacher will be talking to a student in the hallway. You walk
Yep,
by, they're already having a conversation. You don't need
yep.
me. Have the conversation. However, when you see me, now it becomes, let me tell you about this kid and let me belittle the kid in front of you. So now it looks like two
Mm,
adults are having this conversation about all the things that are wrong with this child. And then we wonder why the kid responds the way that they do. Well, if you think like I can't even have a conversation with grown adults about mistakes that they make on things that they turn in without somebody getting sensitive or feeling some type of way. But yet we will run straight through all the emotion, all the emotional context of what our students might be feeling. And I think it goes all the way back to what you just said. If I don't view you as human, I don't love you. And
mhm,
I'm just here to do my job, which is the transference of information. And you better regurgitate whatever it is that I told you because I know and you don't.
mhm.
Well, then absolutely that's what's going to happen. I don't have expectations for your own personal advocacy and growth because at the end of the day, I'm the expert. You're just here. Let me collect my check.
Well, let's talk about the expert thing.
Let's go there,
Let's talk
please.
about that expert thing because to me, honestly, and I don't want to sound arrogant or whatever, but like if you haven't defended a dissertation, then you're not an expert in nothing. And so I look at, and even if you defended a dissertation, you're only an expert in a minutia of things. You a very small portion of whatever it is you researched, right?
Mhm.
Because some people when they put that doctor, they think they know everything. You don't, right? So like I just want to
Talk
be
about it.
clear in terms of where I stand, right?
Yeah.
But I look at teachers, man. I look at teachers as like facilitators of learning. I look at the kids as
Yes.
the experts, right? Because like the kids know exactly what they want to learn, what's going to motivate them to learn, right? And like where they want to go in terms of the direction that they want to be in their lives, right? And so, your job is to facilitate and to motivate them to get to those next levels in terms of meeting those benchmarks of where they want to be. And
Yeah.
so I just I don't know, but like I can understand, if you go, you take this praxis test, you take, you take these classes or whatever, like how that may want you to make you feel like you're an expert, but
Yeah.
I don't. Then also, I think that there's a lot of years that you got to put in terms of like if you are going to master your craft to get to that level to where you are a master teacher or an expert, right? So like
Yeah.
you're not 3-5 years in or whatever, and I'm like, yo, that's an expert teacher. You got to be about 15 to 20 years in. And you got to have the mindset of knowing that even though I'm 15 to 20 years in, I'm still doing self-discovery. I'm still going
Yeah.
out and I'm finding my own professional development. And I'm leading professional development. I'm having thoughtful conversations with staff. I'm mentoring young teachers. All the things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about so I want to do this. I want to get into some of the work of your doctoral study
Yeah,
because I think it lends itself well to this blueprint that I want to talk about. Like if we could freedom dream together. For those who just tapped in, we're freedom dreaming together about what it takes, what it means to build a school that actually loves us, that loves Black people, that centers Black folk. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Yeah.
So, in your work, you talk a lot about, well, your work was about parent engagement.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found very interesting was talking about Epstein's 6 types of parent engagement and how that
Yeah.
related to things.
Yeah.
So, for those who may not know, can you unpack what those 6 types are, and then how that trickles into how we see parental engagement, and some blinders that may be up, if you will?
Yeah. So I I'm critical of Epstein's work, actually,
Yeah,
because again, it's like I feel like it's surface level, right? And so like there's a difference between parent involvement and parent engagement. So
that part.
her work is more so centered around parent involvement. And then that goes back to that whole ideology of white middle class and like the things that they do in terms of like
Yep.
volunteering, in terms
Yep.
of participation, in terms of helping with homework, in terms of showing up, doing a bake sale, and like things of that nature, right? But
Yeah.
when we think about engagement in terms of the things that we do, it's a little bit more nuanced, right? And so when I
Yeah.
think about engagement, I think about if your child had learned something on a Wednesday, and then on a Saturday, we're going to the museum in order to put this together in terms of like piecing the parts that they learned, and we're now like going that extra mile, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
look at it in terms of like, all right, if you're coming home and I can't help you with your homework, but I know that I have a cousin that's at Howard, I can call them and they can help you and they can do a FaceTime. Like just using all the things, all the tools in our community in order to assist in terms of raising these kids, right? Because like,
Yeah.
I come from I and you, we come from the mentality of it takes a village to raise a child. And I think
100%.
that we've kind of lost our way in terms of the village raising a child now. It's like, you got this generation of folks that are very adversarial in terms of like that is my kid, right? And I feel like when I was growing up, the way that I was raised, like I felt like I belonged to the community. Like I was my mother and father's kid, but like I was a community kid because
Yeah.
when I got home, if I did something crazy, everybody on the block knew, and I might have got a lick from everybody on the block in terms of like, these are the expectations that we have for you as you being a member of this community.
Yeah.
And in order for you to be in good standing as a member of this community, you must rise to this level, right? And
Yeah.
like those were the expectations that the community had on me. And so,
Yeah.
Joyce Epstein, like she's brilliant, right? Like
Mhm.
nobody was talking about parent involvement prior. Very few people were talking about parent involvement prior to her. Her framework is the benchmark in terms of like talking about parent involvement. But I think that in terms of bringing it to the next level, what I was able to do was I was able to use a framework from a sister at North Carolina State um, in order to bring in Black masculine care to kind
Mhm.
of further that on a continuum, right? And so when we think about Black masculine care, it's all the things that we do that's not in scholarship that
Mhm.
shows up in the work that we do.
Okay. Okay. Tell me more about that. So, like, you know, I think
Think about
about,
all the so think about all the things that when you read popular scholarship about leadership, right?
yeah.
And they're like, oh well, do this, do that, right? We don't do any of those things. We just show up, we build relationships, we make
Yeah.
connections. It's
Yeah.
the eye contact. It's all
Yeah.
the it's all the sauce that we have being
Yeah.
who we are, being able to relate to kids, right? And so think about it from that perspective. Think about all the things that you read in terms of when you go to professional developments about leadership, right? And you're like,
Yep.
I don't really have to do any of that, right?
Right.
Like think about how some folks show up and they're like, oh, I'm gonna wear this suit today, and because I have this tie on, people are going to respect me. And then you
Yeah.
can come up with whatever it is you have on and whatnot, and them kids are gonna naturally gravitate to you because you are who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You know, it's funny because there is, I say all the time, like, especially with the middle school child, but I think this is bigger than that, right? Like, our babies have a way of detecting what's real and what's fake.
Of
And
course.
the more we dress things up to try to appear a certain way versus actually being, existing, being in proximity, building community. And I say this all the time: community happens when I make your problem my problem, right? When we do that and our babies feel that, man,
Yeah.
there's like no limit to what they're willing to do because they have built a level of trust in you. And so when you say something that maybe even sounds like something they heard before from somebody else, they're going to be inclined to try that thing because of the trust that you've built, because of the love that you've bestowed. So I love that distinction. I think of even about like little things like going to the barbershop, right?
Yes,
So like
sir. Yes, sir.
I I grew up with my grandparents, right? So my grandfather took me to the barbershop, but it was on base. And when I used to go on base, um, there would be these older gentlemen
Yeah.
who dressed a certain way. They almost had like a regalness to them.
Yes,
When I
sir.
sat down in their chair, they were going to lace me with some wisdom, and they
Yeah.
were going to make sure that my fade was high and tight, and that was how it was going to be.
They
And
now they could push your edge up back too.
now listen, they absolutely was gonna push you back. Look over the glasses, Doc,
Yeah.
as they as they do it. It may not be exactly the way you wanted it to be, but it's
Yeah.
gonna be something by the time that they done, Doc.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think
Let me just
go ahead.
do a quick retort. Dr. Lisa Bass is the scholar that came up with the Black masculine care framework. She is at North Carolina State University. I want to make sure I cite Black women when we have these
Mhm.
conversations because they'll come for me. So make sure we do that.
Absolutely. But even in that, right? So I learned a lot going to the barbershop.
Yes.
That
Yes.
there wasn't necessarily a lesson plan.
No.
There wasn't a scope and sequence,
Mhm.
but there was definitely knowledge that was being taught, whether
Yeah.
it was the way that they walked and carried themselves, the lessons that they learned that they wanted to impart when they tried to, when these older men tried to tell me what it meant to be a man,
Yeah.
right? There was a level of love and care and honor, right,
Mhm.
in that space. And you know it's like I heard it said that it's like the black man's country club, right? Like you walk into the barber shop and there is a sense in which we all belong here, and I don't care what part of the conversation is going on, right? You come in, sit down, we talking about sports, you could jump right in and I don't have to know your name, but there's a sense in which we are all part of this thing.
Yeah.
And when I contrast that and I think about the way kind of like schooling, traditional schooling is set up, all of those things like most of those things are absent. Like you have to learn when to talk and when it's even
Yeah.
welcome for you to talk. And you can't just get in because if you get in when you want to, because you're passionate about it or because you feel something, and learning should feel like you should have joy about it, right? But even if you do that, it could be perceived as disrespect
Yeah.
or defiance or a lack of control on the teacher's part. And so we have to kind of push those things down. And so it brings me to my question. If we had to, and we are going to freedom dream together about what it takes to build a school that actually loves us, where would you start? What's the foundational piece of this blueprint that we need to, outside of love, because we talked about that? What
Mhm.
is the foundational piece in building?
Mm. So before we get there, right? Like
Yeah, go ahead.
you were talking about old school barbershop, right? And so
Yeah,
the
yeah,
old school
yeah.
barbershop is revered. The new school barbershop, I don't know. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that are happening in these in these barbershops, bro.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I think learning can happen still, right? But it's like, yo,
yeah.
you gotta check the things that people are saying
Fact
nowadays
check.
in these barbershops. You gotta fact check, right? And so
Yeah,
even if you are in place to fact check, that's still a part of the learning process, right? But like you just can't
yeah.
just hear something and then just take it at its word,
Right.
because the word is not always good. You got to fact check it. But prior to
Absolutely.
then, like I think the barbers that we had growing up,
Yeah.
I feel like they had some well reasoned arguments, right? Like
Mhm.
nowadays, it's just like, I'm just gonna say this and it could be for shock value or whatever.
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure that we clear on that. So in terms of So in terms of the schools that I would, man, so like I think one, it needs to have a black affirming curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So when I say black affirming, I think it goes beyond love, because now it's rooted into teaching us about how we have always been great, right? I feel like the curriculum in American education, it kind of starts like right before slavery and doesn't really talk about much in terms of like what we've accomplished or what we accomplished prior to
Absolutely.
being enslaved, right? And so I think that that's extremely important. I think that we have to again go back to having the right mixture of educators, right? So like we have to have black educators that are black affirming in terms of knowing what their own identities are, so they're not wrestling with any identities. They know, love, understand what it is to be black in American society. And I feel like, a lot of people wrestle with that, right? I think
Yeah.
that some people come into teaching and they are like the breadwinners, right? So they're like first generation college students that end up going into teaching, and there's a lot of pressure that's on them, right? And so
Yeah.
like if you have all this pressure that's on you, and you're the go-to person that's getting these calls from like other relatives, like, oh, I need this, oh, I need that, or whatever, like, how do we now provide these supports for black folks in order to make sure that the mentals are there, right? So
Yeah.
I'm starting with black affirming, but then also I'm gonna stick with staff, what staff may need, right? Like I feel like there needs to be a a psychologist on staff to solely deal with the adults, right?
100%.
To make sure that the adults are getting what they need, because it's a lot when you got 25 students in your classroom and you got 25 sets of issues from these scholars that you're now carrying with you or whatever, right? So like not only are you carrying your own baggage, but like you carrying 25 more bags, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that like we have to talk about just like the psyche of and the importance of dealing with mental health in terms of being a teacher. It's not just, you know 7:30 to 3 or whatever those hours are. When you
Yeah.
are absorbing all of this information from all these scholars, it's like you're going to take that home, right? It's
Yeah.
like regardless of if you have a shut off valve, regardless of whatever it is you have, at some point during the day, you are going to unpack something that was said to you, right? And it's like I don't think that we put enough um enough emphasis on the mental health of teachers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um what else I want? I want wraparound services for kids and their families, right? And so I think that when you have employment issues, like unemployment issues, right? When you're in some of these neighborhoods that have up to 20% unemployment and crime is rampant, it's like we refuse to deal with the issue, right? Like if unemployment was lower, then crime would be lower, right? And
Right.
so as opposed to dealing with unemployment, we now want to be hypercritical and punitive on the crime, right? But like
Yes.
we're not heading off the root issue in terms of like why those crimes exist and why these folks are out here getting it how they live, right? And if we aren't going to talk about that, then we aren't ready to have the real conversations about what it is and what it takes in order to be, be holistic and be whole in the black community. I feel like, and I hate saying this because people get at you when you say it, but like prior to Brown versus Board,
Come on.
our community was the strongest that it has ever been, right? I feel
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
when Brown happened, although folks wanted to integrate and they wanted to force integration, I think forced integration hurt black people. I'm
Absolutely.
and I
100%.
know that there's research that backs up and supports what I'm saying right now. People ain't gonna go do the research. They're just gonna be like, he's out here being a segregationist. No, not at all. But like when you
Yeah.
have a community that's strong and that's proud, right? It's some people that don't want to see that. They only want to see that type of pride in their communities. They don't want to see that in our communities. And until we're able to accept the fact that folks are going to do everything they can in order to divide us and have us at one another's throats, then there's
Yeah.
never going to be love. and there's never going to be good schools, and there's never going to be all the things that we need in order to keep us out of prison, which is
Yeah.
another form of enslavement.
That part. To your point, if I could jump in real quick, I would say that when we talk about the um when we talk about, like you were talking about, the wraparound services, right? All of that is predicated upon the school not seeing itself as separate from the community, but as
Mm,
integral to the community,
mhm,
right? We don't exist without the outside, and I don't even want to say outside. We exist as part of one of the many spokes in the wheel of the community. Like, what if parent teacher conferences didn't have to take place at the school? What if
mm,
we went to community centers? What if we went to spaces where we knew our folks were already there, and asked them to take part in us meeting with them on their terms, right? What if
mm,
that happened? Um, what if in place of, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on the Brown versus Board, because we talk a lot about, where did the black teachers go?
mm.
That's where they went.
I mean, black teachers and leaders.
That's where they went. Like we're still recovering. We're still trying to figure out what happened. Well, they got fired.
Mhm.
Like, the forced integration was cool. We could take these kids because we have to, and you're going to bring military in to make sure that they walk in, and I keep
Do
this
you see
picture
that picture of
behind
Ruby
me.
King? You see that? Ruby King
Yes,
is 69 years old. Do you see that picture of her
yes,
well, that's one of the most
yes.
painful pictures out, man.
And they make you, and I saw this video. It says, like, they keep the pictures in black and white to make you think that the past is past and not next to you in your first, second, and third period.
Mhm,
I love that juxtaposition, right? So I want to go to food too.
mhm.
Like, you said this a while back. You said, listen, if you're a school leader, like, you should always try the food that the
Oh, I
kids are
always
eating.
do. Yeah.
You
Yes, sir.
always do. Yeah. Yeah. And so, um, one of the things I would love to do is, it's not just some processed whatever that comes in, but we actually have a school chef
Yes.
that actually is is like, when you walk in, there is that aroma of home cooked
Yeah,
love that makes you feel like, oh, they really thought about me. What's on
yeah,
the menu is reflective of the community that I serve. Now,
yeah,
yes, we're going to make sure that it has the proper ingredients and that it's healthy and that it's all these things. But man, that home cooked smell, in addition to a loving classroom
yeah.
community, like,
Makes a
imagine what
world
that
of
could do
difference.
for our babies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I so
absolutely.
so I'm gonna shout them out, right? I usually don't shout people out. I only shout out my own school, but first line schools down in New Orleans. I remember visiting their campus, right? And like they had chefs on site. And so I'm from Louisiana, right? So like, Louisiana food is my weakness. And so imagine walking into this cafeteria and smelling like gumbo, or smelling like all of the things that we eat down south, right? And just that
Yeah,
aroma, just like I was like, man, I'm not leaving here. Like what? Like I don't want to go eat
yeah,
anywhere else. I want to eat in here. And they had their own gardens. Like so it
yeah,
was like a farm to table type of situation to where, the food that they was growing, they were cooking. Bro, it's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. And what that will do for the the sense of love and thought and care, it's like, if schools continue on the track that they've been on, it continues to feel like our school,
Mhm.
the students and their communities are the last thought on the school's mind. That
Bro,
we haven't thought about. Go ahead.
I just saw I just saw some data in terms of Baltimore City, right? So Baltimore City just
Mm,
they just put $1 billion into a prison complex. A B, not a million, a B, a billion. So if we're
God,
talking about Baltimore City has always been underfunded in terms of their public school system, right? Like always been. I cut my teeth in Baltimore City, so I started teaching down there. And I remember in 2003, very under resourced, right? And so even 20 years later, still under resourced. But we're talking about $1 billion that
yeah,
we are putting into the prison industrial complex, right? And
yeah,
so, and that's on the backs of black men, and
yeah.
we don't want to have that conversation ever, right? So we want to talk about, oh, these crime rates are high, but we don't want to talk about why the crime rate is high,
That part.
right? We want to talk
Yeah,
about, oh, the violence. oh, the drugs, but we don't want to talk about how these drugs get into these communities and how these guns get here, right? We don't want to
Right.
talk about that.
Right. Right. And so we pathologize black and brown folks, particularly black, right? And by extension brown, like we could pathologize them. And so when it comes to like even in little things, and I don't want to say little like to minimize it, but like things that we might overlook, when the teacher creates the discipline referral, and it doesn't just say this is what happened, but it tells you that this student is the ringleader, this student
Yes.
continues to do this, and now you are now talking about the intention, you are now talking about the motive, you are now talking about them in terms of them being pushed out of your class and all of these things, and you feel justified to do so for whatever reason.
Yeah.
For me, like there is a point at which we got to put a complete pause and ask yourself, like, do you really even want to be here? Do you even really want to teach these kids? And
Yeah.
if that's not the, like, listen, I'm not hurt by it,
Mhm,
please exit
mhm,
stage left.
mhm.
But it continues to be the biggest export in our communities, the teachers that
Right.
will come in, not be connected to the community, not love the community, not know anything in the community, come in, collect that check, and then go back to their neighborhoods and spend that somewhere else.
Go back to listen. I tell people all the time, it's like, listen, y- I'm I'm fortunate enough, right, to where like my kids go to my kids went to my school. Like my daughter's still in my school, and I think that that is the staple of any school leader. And you'll have folks that'll debate like, oh, it needs to be some separation, it needs to be that, but like one of the ways in which you could tell that if somebody is invested in their school in terms of if it's bad, it's going to be better quick because my kid is in here, is to put your kid in your school. And so a lot of these teachers that teaches to these schools, man, their kids is in private schools. So that's telling you right there how they feel about their job. And it's also telling you how they feel about your kids, right? Because listen, if I'm unwilling to put my kid in my own school, then that's telling me exactly what I need to know in terms of how I feel about your kids and how I feel about where I work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I think that the other thing that I would do in building this school that actually serves and loves us is I would think that the training, the preparation, the accountability, the love and service of teachers, we would have to eradicate the racism of low expectations.
Oh wow. Yes. You
So
you coined that perfectly.
when we come in and you okay, no, they can't do this, so we're going to edit, we're going to and we'll have very creative and very wonderful names for it. We've modified,
Yeah.
right? We've
Differentiated.
we've we've differentiated our instruction according
Yeah.
to our learning groups, and
Made it
and we
culturally
hide it.
relevant.
Yes. And so we
Culturally
do all
deficient.
of that.
Yeah.
And but really all we're saying is, no, I'm gonna go ahead and push in these things that I know that they can, and get them out of my hair, because I know
Yep.
that and I'm not going to push them because I don't want the struggle piece in my I don't want that component in my classroom. I don't want them to have to struggle through or push them to struggle through, because I know what that can do for them. Right. Like I think about it this way. When I was playing basketball in high school, I there was like 10 seniors on the team. So I was playing deep left bench. Like I'm a sophomore playing deep left bench, and I'm sitting there. One of the seniors was like, "Man, come on, come lift with us." And I get on the bench, and he takes these weights and he puts it on each side. I have no idea. I have not done the math. I don't even know how much the bar weighs at this point. So I am
Yep.
sitting down and I begin to push. And when I tell you, Doc, I'm like, I'm not moving the bar whatsoever, but I'm pushing as hard as I can. Now the senior, he gets a good laugh at it. He takes a few digs, and he's like, it's a real humbling experience for me. But what he then does is he spots me. He
Yep.
lifts the bar,
Of
and
course.
we together are now lifting this weight. What I
Yep.
couldn't do by myself, because he put certain scaffolds in it, I now begin to lift it. And before I knew it, his hands aren't on it anymore. I'm beginning to lift it myself.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think about that in relation to our to what we do with our students. Well, there are too many teachers who will say, "All right, they can't lift that, so I'm never going to give it to them." I'm never
course.
going to work that into the curriculum. I'm never going to circle back to that. And and I don't blame teachers solely because pacing guides, standardized testing, and
Mhm.
I'm not the anti-standardized testing guy.
Don't be.
Like I think I'm not that guy,
Yeah.
right? At the same time, I recognize how because of the way we structured standardized testing into our things that there's so much of a push to just teach to the test and that we leave out some of these other components. So I wish that there was a way we could restructure it. So yes, we could be accountable to certain standards and certain
Yep.
things. However, we wouldn't just be teaching to the test and forsaking all the other important parts of learning. And I don't know where that balance is, but I would think that we could find a better one than what we have presently.
Yeah, I love that, but I think that the balance is to teach above the test, right? So, like, right now, we don't
Ah,
like,
come on now.
we don't get accused of teaching to the test, we teach above the test.
Yeah.
It's like, well, the
Yeah.
test is the bare minimum. You passing that test is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And then also what you see is you see a lot of teachers, uh, to your point, you'll see they're not even challenging our babies on the grade level that they're on, right? Like,
That part.
they will water that curriculum down so much to where you could have a sixth grader that has never seen sixth grade work that is doing fourth, maybe even fifth grade work if we're lucky, right? And
Mhm.
that's what following the pacing guide. That's what doing all of the things, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But like I think that that's sort of the ways in which our system is designed to
Mm.
underachieve for historically marginalized kids. But it takes those educators that care, those educators that love their kids to come in and go above and beyond to make sure that, all right, I'm going to challenge you because like a lot of these kids, they just want to be challenged. We just got to tap in order to find out what drives them, what motivates them, what is rooted in their joy, and they will rise to the occasion. I've never ever had low expectations for my kids, any of my kids. Right, my bar
Yeah.
was always high, and my
Yeah.
bar will always continue to be high because I know that there's brain the brain is elastic, right? and
Yeah.
so and so these babies' brains will grow. All you got to do is be willing to pour into them,
That
and
part.
they're gonna get to where they need to be.
100%. 100%. I want to do some housekeeping items. Then I want to kick it to you for some final questions and
Yeah,
final question to wrap up. If you have tapped in, I don't care if you're coming from LinkedIn, if you're coming from YouTube. I want to encourage you to please tap into uh, Dr. Angram's work. Follow him, support him. He's out at conferences. Are you going to State of Black Learning, by the way?
for sure. That's
I will
my
see you
guy
there.
conference, man. Yeah, that's my guy.
Yeah.
Chase is my guy. I just spoke to him earlier today.
All right, all right, all right. So I will definitely see you there. Yeah. So we are. I want to encourage you if you're coming from and you're familiar with his work. If you find value, please give me a follow, a subscribe to the YouTube. That really helps with pushing out great content to the educators that need it to be able to challenge and push us forward. So I want to invite you all to do that. In addition, brother, I want to wrap up our time. I want to ask you this. Um, for an educator who's tapped in and has listened to this and has gotten to this point, and maybe they're reflecting and they're saying, man, I love this conversation, um, but it feels daunting. My school isn't set up like that. My school, we struggle with so many different things, and I'm having trouble keeping my fight going, my passion going. It's hard out here. What would your advice be to that teacher? And Yeah, what would your advice be to that teacher? What would you tell them?
Yeah. So it's hard for everybody, right?
That part.
I start there. It's hard for everybody, and so there are many things that are happening in my school that I don't like that I could harp on, but I rather harp on the things that are the most positive, right? Because if I'm focusing on the positives, then I can get to the things that are in need of improvement, but there's always that north star that leads me into a positive direction and a positive headspace. I think that we got to involve the voices of these parents in order to understand where they are and meet them where they are and bring them to where we feel like they need to be if they're not there. But like not
Mm,
through like a lens of judgment, but through a lens of partnership. Like we are creating partnerships And so making sure that our schools are community driven, right? And inspiring the community, I think that is super important. But if you're an educator and you're listening to this, just know that every day is a new day for you to come in and shape the lives of your students, and that you are you yeah. So a couple different things, right? So like you're you're better than your last observation. What I mean by that is, you know, your only qualified observer, and I really mean this, is those students that you teach every day. So if you really want feedback on how you're doing in terms of how you're showing up, in terms of how you can get better, tap in with your kids, and they will tell you exactly the things that you need to do in order to motivate them, right? Don't subscribe to folks that come into your room once a year to do your formal observation, because that's a once a year thing, right? I'm really tapped into what kids think, as opposed to that one time a year. I think that we need to put more emphasis in terms of, like, when we do it when we're in college, right? Like that end of course assessment, right? Like you that end of course assessment can make or break your career as an adjunct.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
we need to tap in and build more community in terms of what the kids think, in terms of their learning, and value what kids are saying.
Absolutely. Um, I would only add that uh, educators really have to do some deep internal work about what actually recharges them.
Mhm.
Like, what are their needs? Like educators anywhere, regardless of what your particular role is in school, we almost have, a PhD in understanding what our kids might need or what's
Oh,
going on around us. But sometimes we even fail to get
oh,
ourselves
wow.
need or think deeply
That's a
about
word
what
right
we
there.
need,
That's a
right?
word.
So so I need us to reflect deeply about that and to understand, like, the you are invited into a process, and yes, it gets hard sometimes, and our kids, some of the adults, some of the systems that are broken, they all push our buttons. And I want to borrow from a good brother, Dr. Chris Emden, where he uses the analogy of an elevator, and he tells us that if you want to rise to a new level in an elevator, the thing you have to do is push a button. And so when
Yeah.
our buttons are pressed, it is an opportunity for us to rise to the occasion. And I think we only do that if we're really taking care of ourselves. I think if we're only doing that if we're being honest and reflective about where we need to grow. And we're only doing that if we're centering the needs of our students and their communities, right? When we truly do that, I think we get to the heart of something. So if it's hard, I want us to get curious about why,
Yeah.
what's going on, and what we might need. I think if we could do that, then it might make a world of difference for how teachers are leaving in droves and leaving the profession. Folks aren't coming into the profession. Like, it might mean a difference in terms of our stance. Like, we know that there are other issues. Like, absolutely pay teachers more. Like, pay teachers absolutely a heck of a lot more, right? Like, we know that. But on our end, in terms of controlling what we can control, I think that would make a major difference. So let me say this, but I thank you so much for sharing time and space. Like, I've been following for such a long time. I love the work that y'all do, and so it's great to be, in community with you. Um, for folks who are not familiar with your brilliance, can you please tell them how to support you, how to tap in, where to connect with you?
Sure. So I'm mainly on Twitter, at Mr. underscore Ankrum. You can find me on LinkedIn, Raymond Ankrum, Ankrum. I'm on Instagram. I don't remember my address on Instagram, but I know it's popping over there.
Yeah, right, right.
But if you find me on X, chances are my link tree will take you to my Insta.
Perfect. Perfect. For folks who may be coming from Dr. Incom's side, listen, you can find me at Liberation Lab. If you Google my name, Bobby Morgan, Liberation Lab, all my stuff will pull up. What Coach Prime say? I ain't hard to find. Um,
Yeah,
so I invite you, please support, please tap in, and yeah, we'll keep rocking and rolling. So
yeah.
thank y'all for tapping in. Thank for everybody who's been in the comments, who's chatting it up with us. And I hope that we could take something away from this and grow together. All right, y'all. Till next time. Peace.